friends. Welcome back to Casey Ezel Writer Life. I'm super excited to bring you today to join with Tom Kratman, Justin Watson, and me as we have a conversation about our new release, the Romanov, 1919, the Romanov Rising. Look, I have a fancy slide for it. This book is available now wherever books are sold. You can find it at your local bookstore or online at Bain.com or Amazon or wherever else you feel like writing books. So this book is the second book in what we have planned to be an ongoing alternate history series that postulates what does the world look like if the Russian Civil War turns out very differently because one of the Romanov children survives. And I wanted to get the guys together in part so that you, my friends in YouTube land, can experience the joy that is hanging out with these two gentlemen. But also
minor sarcasm aside.
There is no sarcasm. This is pure joy. I like the Tom and Justin show is one of my favorite pastimes, really. So but also just so that we can kind of talk about, because I know that sometimes when we do like these launch videos and stuff, interviewers have specific questions, and I always feel like there's some point that I really want the audience to know because I feel like it would be interesting to them that we never really get a chance to cover, right? So let's start with that. So Tom, you're you are like the senior author on this project, the boss, the sort of driving force. Is there something that you really think audiences should know about this book in particular and the series overall as a whole? Let's start there.
Well, the series as a whole is ridiculously well researched.
Yeah.
Justin observed, more anal than Freddie Mercury getting jackhammered by Liberace in the middle of San Francisco.
So YouTube,
I didn't do that online, but I did say that. Yeah, that's true.
For the record, we kind of got to get past the 10-minute mark before we get way out there. So,
he didn't technically cuss.
We didn't cuss. That's true. That's true.
I don't know
we
if
did
that's
not
going to
swear.
trigger the algorithm. He used clean words to describe a very, very graphic concept.
Yes. Yeah. So tell us why you say that. I mean, I know why you're saying that, but tell us why you say that, Tom. Tell my viewers.
Besides nearly immolating okay, well, it goes back a ways.
Yeah.
One of the things we had to do for the Romanov rescue was create a plausible special operations doctrine and set of equipment for hostage rescue.
Yep.
And there's no electric lights. There is a sort of a pull flashlight, and we tried that. It wasn't good enough. And I wrote that part. I showed it wasn't good enough by killing somebody in a training exercise for lack of light.
Very patented.
But
He said it's very patented, Tom Kratman.
But I bought 4. I think it was 4 carbide lamps. Yeah, that you put on your helmet, or you could put on your helmet. They were for miners, really. They stopped using them in coal mines because they really are hot and they'll make things go boom. But they were perfect for this solution. At least I thought they ought to be. So I to test how good they were in a totally blacked out room, I put the 4 of them in there and torched them off and started them up. And one of them started shooting flame out the sides, which is not good inside your house. So I had to pick it up and carry it outside and dump it in the snow, which just burned the shit out of me. So that's kind of about as self-destructively anal a form of research as I can imagine.
Yeah. Never let it be said that Tom Kratman is not dedicated to his craft.
Then there's the 10 ruble Russian note, which is actually what caused Justin's comment. I had a certain amount of money in a safe that gets low in Romanov Rescue, but I wasn't sure how much money would fit. I had an idea in my mind of the safe, and it seemed to me I went and found a typical safe on the Trans-Siberian Railway for money. And okay, well, how much fit in there? And originally I was thinking of something the size of a US dollar, right? And then I remembered, no, wait a minute, our dollars used to be bigger too. And I ordered a Russian 10 ruble note, an imperial Russian 10 ruble note. For all I know, it's legal tender again. From eBay, and got it back, and it was like twice the size of a US dollar. So I had to cut the money by about 50%.
Yeah.
And then there's the grenade and the helmet. I did not buy a Moisten Nagant because I had a pretty good idea what a 7.62 by 54 kicking you in the shoulder felt like.
Yeah.
However, for a future volume, I did buy a 6.5 millimeter Carchano, so I can see what that kicking you in the shoulder feels like. So
yeah, the research for this series has been not just next level, but really kind of an adventure, right? So from my perspective, so you guys are watching my channel, so you probably know a little bit about me, but just to recap, all three of us are retired military officers. Tom and Justin both retired from the U.S. Army, and then I retired from the Air Force. And I'm not only, you know, the token Air Force chick, but I'm also the token aviator in the group. And so we come to the first book. I flew helicopters for 22 years in the Air Force. Comes time to research and write the first book, the Romanov Rescue. And Tom says to me, okay, well, there's this whole plot line involving an airship. He's like, okay, well, cool, airship. You can write about that, Casey. You're an aviator. And I'm like, Tom, there's differences between lighter than air flight and rotary wing. Like, that's about as diametrically opposed on the scale of aviation as you can possibly get, right? And he's like, you'll figure it out. So I did. And I mean, he sent me a bunch of links, you know, some very cool videos and articles and stuff, researching in fact, this specific airship that we talk about in the Romanov Rescue. It's the one that's like really phallically placed on the cover, which unfortunately I don't have available. I should have prepped that up. But
I got you. I got you covered.
You got one right there?
Here we go.
What's that?
There we go.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me get out of the glare.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So that airship, the one that we specifically wrote about, is actually a historical. It existed in our history and is very famous. To my knowledge, to this day, it still holds the world record for the longest duration lighter than air combat mission in the world, which is a very specific record that I cannot imagine being broken anytime soon.
In our universe, it maintains that record from our book.
That's true. In fact, it does. So, that was my adventures in research book one. So it comes time to write book two. And we start talking about characters that we want to include. And we decide to write about the character of Quentin Roosevelt. So if you're not familiar, Quentin Roosevelt was the youngest son of US President Theodore Roosevelt. He was a World War I aviator. He flew in France, flying biplanes, right? Timeout. Okay. Yes, Tom, did I say something wrong?
Yeah, we decided on Quentin in the first book. And you can know this because we were the pilot who in real life killed him and used him to escort the Zeppelins. That he
Christian
could dog.
Right, which is important. Yeah, because in real life, thanks for reminding me of that. Because in real life, Quentin Roosevelt was killed when in a dogfight when basically 3 Luftwaffe pilots attacked his biplanes specifically and brought him down. And to this day, there's still controversy as to which of those 3 German aviators actually killed him, because it was a very famous event. Well, in our timeline, 2 of those guys are elsewhere. They're in fact escorting, like Tom said, the Zeppelin that I wrote about. And so that leaves it, instead of a 3v1, it's a 1v1 aerial engagement. And those odds, Quentin liked those odds a lot better. So in our world, he survives. So this time I got to research biplane combat, which again is not helicopter aviation, but was still really, really fun to dig into. What about you, Justin?
What pilot's license? We don't.
Well, and
got a point. I've never manned a French 75mm cannon myself either, so we're
Sure.
all dealing with equipment that's a little foreign to us.
Sure, sure. Unlike Tom, though, I can't just go purchase a Newport. You know what I mean?
Oh, come on. It can't be that rare. I mean,
it'd be cooler if I could.
That would be
got a
pretty
mortgage.
What's that? Oh,
They
take
got
out
a
a mortgage. Yeah, yeah.
So,
yeah.
so the research for this is really interesting because on the one hand, we have the level of detail, like we have the floor plan of the house they were in Tobolsk. You know, we have so we know, you know, the girls were in this room. You know, the mentor was in this room. The parents were in this room. Like, we have that level of detail. On the other hand, there are just these gaps that you're like, oh, well, now we're going to have to do some detective work and figure out what the best thing is. Like, I remember Tom was, we were talking back and forth, and Tom did the heavy lifting with some of his friends to figure out, like, did this place actually have a power grid? You know, like, was there, like, electricity is a thing? Was it a thing here? Because in Russia, that's an open question in any given city you're in. But there was a lot of that detail of not just figuring out, but figuring out what we could reasonably figure out. Because not only is there the, you know, I only read English, to be clear, I don't read Russian. Not only do I have to go with English language sources, there's also the fact that it was a very large, very chaotic conflict in a scale that even World War II, as big and complex as it was, there was a lot better record keeping during World War II by most combatants of the war. So in the Russian Civil War, you end up with, you know, there were about 40,000 dudes, and they were somewhere around the Don Basin for sometime between the 15th and the 18th of this month. You know, so you end up having to reconstruct things. It gives you latitude. But I know for me, like, being a history major, you know, and knowing who I work for in this partnership, like, the terror that the next book I would have read would have had one more detail. With me. It was almost a relief when in this book, I'm still writing the Russian perspective, and there are some great sources about the phase of the war. I have a few on my shelf back here: White Against Red, the biography of Anton Denikin. Pyotr Wrangel wrote a book which is a little self-serving, but I think is mostly bearing out against the historical record. But I got the Western Front in this book, and I got some American troops on the Western Front. And let me tell you, that was kind of a relief. Because not only do I know that subject better inherently, there's no shortage of sources to go back and figure out, like, nope, this is where they were on this date. This is when they attacked. These are the casualties they suffered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a history nerd by nature. I don't think you could take on this project without having some love of it. It has been a lot of fun to dig back into the historical record and really revisit the Great War from that perspective. And then, you know, with that foundation, go forth and be able to extrapolate on, you know, what happens when you mash this force against this force, which never really happened. You know, we did fight the communists to a small degree in the Russian Civil War, but the way we're headed, it looks like it's going to be a much bigger degree, which I'm excited to get into.
Yeah, for sure.
Bigger than we suspected. I'll tell you later.
No, go ahead, Tom.
I picked up a couple of books on armor on both sides in the Russian Civil War, and riffing off it's hard to find sources and to be sure of things. Well, the author of this one wasn't sure where the Russians got there were no FTs.
Yeah,
it might have been that they made them themselves. They claimed to have. It might have been that they got them from the French, who had like 72 that they probably abandoned as cheaper to leave as scrap than to ship back. But it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah,
and they played a big role in Tsaritsyn, amongst other places. But that's the other thing too, is the FT 1917 is the most successful tank of the Great War, played a part in the Russian Civil War. But one of the challenges is it's not operationally mobile the way a modern or even a World War II tank would be, right? Like, if you're taking that thing for a long way over cross country, you're rail heading it, putting it on a rail car, you're putting it on the back of a truck.
Yeah.
You're only taking it off,
Right.
within a few miles of where you want it to, spearhead and advance with your infantry.
Well, that's one of the things
It's not as
that I
operational
love so much.
of course.
Well, exactly. And that's what I was getting at, is that that's one of the things that I love so much about writing in this particular time frame. And I spoke about this on a radio show that the three of us did recently. But this period of time, the early 20th century, with the Great War being kind of the catalyst, but it really was the end of civilization as the people who lived there knew it, right? I mean, you got to think we are a couple of decades from even having motorized vehicles at all. And so the Great War tanks that they're using are not what I think when most people talk about like early 20th century tanks. Of course, they picture the World War II era tanks, the the Shermans and I don't know these words. You guys know these words.
Come through, Casey. Come through.
the Tigers and the Panzers. I know those words. Sherman, Tiger, Panzer. There we go.
A Tiger is a Panzer. Squares and rectangles, but still full points.
Thank you. But next we'll talk about Fokkers and Newports. But the kind of, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So everything is changing in the world of our characters right now. And that was one of the things that I loved most about writing this particular volume, was kind of looking at, okay, so in 1919, the Great War is over. The Russian Civil War is still going on, but there's other things going on around the world. And because of the way that we split up the story, I had the opportunity to look at some of those things. And I really think that that's going to be one of the pieces that I suspect our audiences are going to really enjoy, is sort of that lens into living in that turning point of history. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree with you.
Oh, thanks.
It is. You're right, Casey. It is really interesting that you have this transitional period in history where you have social, technological, economic, political change all happening, often very violently in a very short period of time. I've been doing it, like, been reading a lot. There's a great YouTube channel called The Great War that's available that has World War I week by week. Has a 15 to 20 minute summary of each week. That's pretty good for the overview. It's not a replacement for reading, but it's a good supplement. But they had one episode that was super interesting to me about the importance of Velveeta in population growth, just the shelf-stable cheese, and how massively important that was to American and eventually European population growth.
Right.
Just that like we don't think about refrigeration. We don't think about how important that is in day-to-day life. Likewise, motorization. Tom will be quick to point out if I don't. Even in the late 1930s and 40s, you've still got a lot of logistics being moved by mule cart, like a lot, maybe more than is moved by truck early on in the war. And in
for everybody but us in the British.
Yeah, well, for everyone but America and the British, yeah. But for World War I, even more so, like things that, the memes of, oh, well, they lined up and got gunned down by machine guns. Well, maybe in some battles, but, they were trying to adapt as fast as possible. In many cases, they adapted more quickly than we give them credit for. And things like, oh, the machine gun made cavalry relevant. Well, no, as it turns out, it didn't. On the Eastern Front, where you didn't have the troop density to turn basically the entire front into a fixed defense, horse-mounted maneuver became incredibly important, not just for reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance, but also for pursuit. Its classical purpose of, like, we're going to break an infantry formation, and then we're going to send people on horseback to chase them. That was still extremely relevant. There were really interesting tactics. Even on the Western Front, the French cavalry had really good and interesting anti-machine gun nest tactics with their cavalry, that they could use. Again, it just depended on the terrain, right? So this is a very transitional period where you have a lot of things that I don't think modern Americans put together interacting with one another, both on
Yeah.
the battlefield and in other arenas.
Yeah, and this is, our story is, and Tom, I got a question for you here in a second too, but I just want to point out this story is very military focused because that's the background that the three of us have. That's the kind of stories that we enjoy telling. But these changes were so they were so fundamental that not only are we talking about how how these changes affected military engagements, but also just like the fundamental structures of society, right? Like how people looked differently post-war versus pre-war at class structures and royalty or not royalty and governments and bureaucracies, and all of those things is something that we touch on more in this current book, the Romanov Rising, 1919, the Romanov Rising versus the first book, the Romanov Rescue. And so that's another thing that I specifically wanted to point out for our audiences to kind of get excited about and maybe dig into. All right. So Tom, you wrote the first chunk of the book is essentially it's patented Tom Kratman battle
And training for battle.
storytelling. Yeah, battle and training storytelling. What was your goal overall with this piece of the story? Like, what were you trying to convey?
Set up for, you're talking about the Strat Recon's approach to Yekaterinburg and recruiting of Bochkareva and what remains of her girls, and the fight for Yekaterinburg and the rescue of, well, let's see, a whole bunch of things. Very important. Rescuers should be impaled. I mean, I'm sorry, rapists should be impaled. That's important. And I showed that.
Yeah.
More or less. Using bayonets rather than wood stakes, but still, you work with what you
have to adapt.
Improvise, adapt, stick them in the ass with the bayonet. And then they deserved it. There is, by the way, no doubt in my mind that Ella and Barbara, whatever her last name was, were raped. They never talked about it, but I'm sure they were. Because
they were killed immediately afterwards.
Yeah, there's no record of it, but there's no reason to beat women before you kill them. You can just kill them, throw them in the well. They're not that big, they're not that strong, but you can beat them to make them acquiescent. So I'm pretty sure that.
So that's something that Tom and I had gotten online. You had said this is the only book that might be safe for a 9-year-old, and I was like, hold on. Remember that scene? like the rest of the book.
It was hard to write.
The rest
I hate
of the
writing
book.
that shit. That's hard to write.
Yeah. And I think there is an element of, like it's easy to get academic and talk about Bolshevism as a economic, philosophical, political movement. But I think it is important that we show the outright evil that communism brought. And you certainly did that in your section.
Right. The jewels and sewn into their dresses isn't enough to fight a war with, but the gold and silver in Yekaterinburg is. So I thought it was very important for plot purposes to grab that. Also, Yekaterinburg turning on the communists because of the reign of terror that they inflicted, so that they could strip off enough men to send after Tobolsk. I think that was pretty plausible, and I think the new Imperial Guard needed a workout.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's a great sequence. I genuinely enjoyed reading, reading all of it, and as much as I do enjoy military stories and think that they have an incredibly important place in our canon. I can't read everybody's military writing, but that particular, I just don't enjoy it, right? But that particular part, I think we really did. And I think your fans, the Tom Kratman fandom, is going to enjoy it because it's patented you, right? So.
Bloody, realistic, frustrating, brutal.
Yeah.
heavy on the brutal,
realistic.
Yeah,
and occasionally funny. Occasionally
funny. Speaking of funny, another piece. Not that this whole video is going to be my favorite things about this book, but that's what we're going to talk about.
It's your channel. It's your
because it is my channel. That's right. Justin, I heard you say one time that if you had to name a specialty of yours in terms of writing, that it would be nobody can write soldiers fucking off quite as well as you do. And so talk to us a little bit about how you put that concept of soldiers fucking off into 1919, the Romanov Rising.
Well, I mean, we all have experience. We've all led units or commanded units of various sizes and compositions. And one thing, I know Tom and I have talked about it extensively, and Casey, I'm sure you'd agree, is your troops simultaneously turn your hair gray while keeping you young, keeping you very young. Because even when they're doing the things that get you called at 4 a.m. in the morning, it's often hilarious. Like you're not happy that your phone's ringing at 4 a.m, but when you hear the story, it's kind of worth it on a certain level. So that's one thing that, like, I will not dream to claim that my writing is as brutal as Tom's. I do try to depict the effects of combat, mental and physical and emotional, accurately. I try not to gloss it over. I try to make sure we understand when we're in the middle of a war that, the human body only takes so much damage and is ripped apart fairly easily when you start involving high explosives and fragmentation. And in the Great War, chemical weapons tends to inflict its own kind of misery and death. So I definitely try not to gloss that stuff over. But what I think a lot of people miss is that the Army is hilarious to serve in. Like the military is just, it is a hysterical experience. You combine a bunch of high energy, mostly competent young people, and we are all, we're all in 40s and above here now, but when we were serving, we're all in our 20s and 30s largely, so we are young for the vast majority of it. Mostly competent, high energy people in dangerous and or absurd situations. What tends to occur is pretty funny as a result. Sometimes tragic.
From the minute you wake up.
Yeah. From the minute you wake up, like, you end up with all kinds of crazy situations. So when I write, especially American soldiers, the humor with which they address situations is unfailing. Basically, like they will always be a laugh. So there's actually, there's my two main characters who are fictional and not actual historical characters, because I cover a lot of American historical figures in my section of the book. You've got little known guys like George S. Patton, Douglas MacArthur, William J. Donovan, Father Duffy, the famous chaplain of Donovan's regiment. There's one scene in there that I think is one of the most humorous bits in the book, and it's not, I didn't make it up. It is in the record that Father Duffy and Colonel Donovan are on a promontory watching the 69th march by, and the 69th kicks in with, Lulu had a chicken, Lulu had a duck. She brought him into bed to her and taught her how to bang away on Lulu, bang away good and hard. Like, they're singing this at the top of their lungs, marching towards the front. That is historical record. I didn't even have to make that up. So that sort of thing is just common. And when I read that piece in the regimental history of the 69th, my heart was very warmed, because I was like, it is good to know that the American fighting man has not changed much in 100 years at all. So, in addition to getting my gear right, getting my my details right, my historical details right, trying to make sure the tactics make sense based on historical knowledge, my own combat experience. In addition to that, I always want to communicate, like, hey, this is what we are actually like. At a certain, we're individuals. There's not one stereotypical soldier, but like, when you read a story I wrote, I want you to feel like, oh, it's not, we're not the scum of the earth enlisted for drink, and we're not Captain America. Most of us are somewhere between those extremes.
Yeah.
Some of us are more like the Punisher.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty apt. That's pretty apt. Who is your favorite? Who is your favorite actual historical character? This is a question for both of you that you personally wrote in this volume. I don't care who goes first.
In this volume,
Yeah,
Botchkareva.
Botchkareva. Um, yeah. So, quick rundown, Tom, for people who haven't read the books yet. Who is Botchkareva?
Okay, well, she's a woman. She was a sergeant, and really, as a practical matter, she was never more than a sergeant, even though she was commissioned. And she joined the Russian army. And she was big, stout. I think I read somewhere in something she wrote that one place she was, they put on a play, and they had to use males for the female parts because they were more feminine than she was, and prettier too.
Yeah. She was like a farm girl, wasn't she? Wouldn't she grow up on a farm or something? Did you tell me that one time?
Somewhere out in Siberia, whether they were farming or hunting or trapping furs, I really don't know. Unquestionably, she was a tough bitch.
Yeah.
And she was commissioned and given permission to raise a battalion of women. She chose a pretty tacky name for it, Women's Battalion of Death. There's a movie about it in Russian with subtitles. If you can nose around and find it. I don't remember the might have been Battalion of Women or Women's Battalion, something like that. And it was only 300 men. It was a big company, and she never deluded herself that it was ever more than a big company. And they were treated extremely badly by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
Although, be it noted, the first one ever to demand that Botchkareva be stood against a wall and shot wasn't a Bolshevik. It was that asshole Kerensky.
Yeah.
But she managed to. In the book, she's doing something she was trying to do, which is save whatever remnants of her battalion she could. A lot of the girls were sick. Although the historical record doesn't say that. I made up 2 of them that were hooking in Moscow, but they were doing it to get food for the rest of the girls.
Yeah.
And
Kerensky, just for anybody who's not as familiar with the Russian Civil War, Kerensky led the provisional government between the Tsar's abdication and the October Revolution, just so, if anyone's not trying to know who that is.
Amazing incompetent. So anyways, Botchkareva actually ended up in Yekaterinburg at about the right time to be recruited by Strat Recon. So
yeah, and that's a great sequence. I loved the sequence of how you her recruitment, right? Like how you rolled her in with the others and included her and her girls in their nefarious schemes to get to reach their goals, to get the things that they wanted to get. Justin, how about you?
So I'll give the tongue-in-cheek answer, and then I'll give the real answer. The tongue-in-cheek answer is Douglas MacArthur, because I got to take the piss out of him quite a bit. I got to take a few shots at Douglas MacArthur that are based on historical evidence and his character, I think, absolutely fair in the book to do. So that was fun. My 2 fictional characters start out as aides de camp to Doug because he was snatching up ring knockers coming to the front and using them as staff and or aides rather than letting them get their platoon leader time, as all lieutenants should. So that was fun. I won't spoil anything of that. I hope folks enjoy that segment when they come to it. In reality, I think my favorite political figures I wrote about were the 3 figures of Krasnov, Pyotr Krasnov, Pyotr Wrangel, and Anton Denikin. And the reason why is they kind of represent, and they're real men, but to me, they kind of encapsulate what's happening to Russia in this time. Wrangel is old school nobility. Pyotr Wrangel is a very competent cavalry general who is from Russia's aristocratic class. Not entirely reactionary. He understands things have to change, but he definitely represents the old order. Krasnov is this just like competent, daring, but awful opportunist. Krasnov in the real world would end up being executed because he ended up fighting for the Nazis after the White Russian Army failed, in the real world, and he had to be exiled. He went and lived in Germany, ended up working for Hitler, and then properly being executed for it. Then Denikin is the guy who commands the volunteer army in South Russia. The army that's probably in the most decisive combat with the Reds is Denikin. And he is a bootstraps guy. He grew up kind of poor. He went into the army and actually rose through competence in the ranks. He didn't have any noble patron that we can trace. I mean, I've read multiple sources on this. I will say some of the books, because Denikin did end up in America after World War II, he probably gets a slightly rosier depiction because he was here to shape that depiction. But that being said, he is, there is open acknowledgement of his flaws as a commander and the things he failed to stop, right? He didn't really make an effort to stop the pogroms that the White Russian army dealt in. Now, how realistically could he have stopped it? That's an open question, but he didn't. But that being said, you're dealing with folks of such varying motivation, from the tradition of the Russian nobility to an entirely self-serving adventurer to someone who has a deep sense of duty and is actually trying to bring about the best possible result for Russia, and no one forcing them really to work together. Now, Wrangel is in Denikin's chain of command. They kind of, there is some subordination there, but you have these great big personalities who are extremely interesting, extremely complex motivations, and no one to give them unity of command.
Yeah.
It'll be really interesting when we'll see what happens when they actually have someone they can all get behind.
Let me change that a little. Yeah. Tatiana can't give them unity of command, really. She can give them an excuse for unity of command.
There you go.
Slightly different.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm talking about an operational tactical principle, and yeah, no, you're right. I accept that correction.
Especially because, and this is actually a plot point in the story. Denikin had no reason to love the imperialists. I mean, like you said, he was completely a self-made bootstrapper kind of guy. So the whole concept of aristocracy and monarchy, and you didn't earn shit. Like, what? Why do I owe allegiance to you? You're a 17-year-old, or I guess Tatiana's 21 at this point. But yeah. And
it's really interesting because Denikin's got he has the legitimate challenge of the white movement is a mishmash of Mensheviks, people who want representative government, old school imperialists, people who want autocracy back, people who want a socialist government back, and he's trying to hold them all together. He was faced with the fact that throughout his command, and Wrangel had the same problem when he took over, all you could give was anti-communism. That's all they had was, we know we don't like the Bolsheviks, and we know we're going to fight them, but there was never a driving, here's what we're going to do once we beat the Bolsheviks. There was never there's nothing to rally around.
Yeah, and it's not just unity of command, but it's also, and maybe this is more along the lines of what Tom was talking about, not a little bit more esoteric. It's unity of principle, it's unity of goal, it's unity of what are we doing here? Are we just against something? Because that tends to not be long-term motivational enough. Yeah, right. To answer my own question, my favorite character to write about was Quentin Roosevelt, because he, in aviation history circles, he's this larger than life personality who, everybody agrees it was so tragic that he was this solid aviator, entirely competent, had 100% the aggressive fighter pilot, go get him mentality, and his life was cut short, by being killed in combat. And so it was a lot of fun for me to really kind of dig into this, what we know of this guy from his some of his letters and writings back home and what's been written about him, and kind of extrapolate, okay, but what if, right? What if he had lived? Who would he be after the war? How would he have dealt with the changes that are inevitable once you participate in any kind of combat scenario, regardless of whether it's ground or air or whatever, so that was a lot of fun for me personally. We are, just real quick so that everybody can see again, we are talking about 1919, The Romanov Rising, which is out now, by Tom Kratman, Casey Ezel, and Justin Watson, which, it's me. Hi. And this, I want to talk for a minute about this cover. So this cover is gorgeous. It's by artist Sam Kennedy, who is, it's very funny because he and I were talking, he and I have done in 2024, I think he covered 5 books for me, with this being one of them. Yeah. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work with such a talented dude. But the interesting thing about this cover is, so that's Tatiana on the cover. And she's not wearing a gown or a crown or sitting on a throne, right? So there's a little bit of foreshadowing and hinting going on in this scene that we've got going on here. Why? And I'm addressing this question mostly to Tom. Why did we need to put her? Why did you want to put her in combat specifically?
Oh, I was barely consulted. I think I like the cover a good deal, but I was asked for some options, and I said, "Well, okay, this is one, and that's another, and here's a third."
No, I meant in
in terms of the story, though, Tom, that was
yeah.
your scene that you wrote, which is my favorite thing you wrote was Tatiana with the mortars. So
yeah,
right. Yeah. Well, it makes her consider the scene makes her considerably more admirable.
Yeah.
And it needed to be on the cover because if she doesn't do that, the cause is lost. If she doesn't do with the mortars what she does, they're going to lose right then and there.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it so dramatically appealing, Tom, is that it's not just a high-level official or a royal making a, standard, like, oh, I showed up in the war zone visit. It's like, no. She actually did something that mattered with her time at the front.
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons I like that. Did so what?
On the sneak, on the slide.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right.
She wasn't supposed to be there.
Right. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't on the battlefield as the Empress or the Tsarina. She was there as Primate Romanova. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love so much about that particular sequence of scenes is, from a character development standpoint, one of the ongoing things that Tatiana is struggling with is, okay, I know that I can't be like my father. I can't be an emperor like he was, but who do I have to be, right? What do I do instead? And her experience as essentially a rank and file soldier working with the mortars in this like incredibly pivotal battle, seeing what they do and participating in it, I think is a really big part of her development towards answering that question. And the answer to that question is what is going to allow for her to be that unifying purpose or that unifying figurehead for all of this mishmash.
The answer, what do I need to be is somebody the army loves, and they will after this.
That's part of the answer. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's the entirety of the answer, but for sure it's part of the answer, and it's probably a more immediate part of the answer considering that they're in the midst of a civil war, right? Like that's a close alligator to the boat, Yeah, for sure. Let's talk now for a second. Who's going to love this book, in your opinion? Like, who is this? Who's the ideal reader? And I'll ask Justin first. Who's going to?
Oh, of course you will. So anyone, I will say, if you enjoy Anton Meyer, or you enjoy the Brotherhood of War, or you enjoy really anything from W.B. Griffin, although I'm sure Tom will comment about the flaws in Griffin's writing here in a second. And there are some. I think if you enjoy historical epic, or anything with sweep to it. I'd say it's not a similar conflict at all, but if you're a Shara fan, Killer Angels, things like that, I think this is right in your wheelhouse. Now, all of us have written science fiction. Casey, you've written fantasy too, I think, and I know I've written a bit of fantasy. Tom, I think you've dodged swords and dragons so far. Well, not swords, but dragons so far.
Right. The nearest I came was a sort of urban fantasy, but that was not magic based.
Which is a great book, by the way.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, Dirty Water is amazing, by the way. Everyone should pick that up too. I know that's not the podcast we're on right now, but but I think this is, they advise authors to have a niche and stick to it, and we are just flagrantly ignoring that because we all things, and because we love a variety of things, right? Tom and I were, BSing about the new Battlestar Galactica last night. This, I think, is right in the wheelhouse for anyone who enjoys an epic story of war and intrigue, and with a reasonable amount of character-driven drama at the heart of it as well. All of it together. It's the whole package in that sense. It has, we talked early in the podcast about how committed we all are to authenticity. Casey and I have not self-immolated in the name of authenticity, but most of this bookshelf is Russian history. The first time it happened to me, it hurt, and it took a long time. The first time I almost got immolated, it hurt and took a long time to recover from it. So I got a little gun shy about setting myself on fire after that.
Yeah,
so
I'm too pretty to burn myself. Sorry.
Fair enough.
Appreciate that.
This author tree gets a lot uglier if that happens.
There's actually a not funny story there. Yolanda set herself on fire. From here to here. If she didn't have long hair, she'd have toasted her face too. But Yolanda is tough. The day after that, we went to an officer's thing in Savannah. And the day after that, she had to go into the hospital because in the course of going to the officer's thing, she managed to infect everything.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah, it was right.
Yeah.
But
in any
company
event,
wives would take turns showing up and brush her hair. It was very nice.
Aww.
That's cool. Tom, how about you? Who would love this story?
Two kinds of people, and one of these is advice to Tony if she ever notices this. But translated into Russian and put on Kindle, the Romanov Rescue and the Romanov Rising and subsequent volumes will sell very well, I think. And the other people are interested in history or in war, particularly war. And those two interests tend to go together. I mean, I don't remember who said it, but the most persistent sound echoing through human history is the sound of war drums.
Sounds like Keegan. I'm gonna say it's Keegan.
Dumb look on my face, senility. I don't remember. But I'm not sure it was Keegan. I think it might have been somebody else. Anyway, those two groups.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. I think that this, I say this all the time, right? I am my own first audience member. I write the stories that I want to read, and this one is no exception. I think if you are the type of person who approaches history from a perspective of who were the individuals that created this grand sweeping drama, what's their individual story, what's their individual motivations and choices, and who were they, who are they, I think that this will be right up your alley, because at the end of it, that's really what we really dig into on multiple different levels, and it's one of the reasons that I'm really proud of this book overall, because I think we, not to break my own arm patting myself on the back, but I think we did a good job. You know what I mean?
And it's harder than people think. Cooperating isn't easy.
Yeah.
Well, it's not
Getting
like
the
there are
three
three strong personalities on this podcast.
yeah. But you know, it's hard. It's hard to figure out where you're going to go. It's hard to
Mhm.
stick with where you're going to go.
Mhm.
Justin is particularly bad for writing too much. I'm particularly bad for saying, oh no, for thinking in the process of, no, I'm going to have to talk about this too, and that's going to take 10,000 words, and I'm going to have to talk about that because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Casey's the most reasonable of us.
It's funny that you think that that's the case.
Well, it's all about what your yardstick is, Casey. Because in this crowd, I think you are the centering force.
Oh well,
in this trio.
I just want to like I said, one of the reasons that I do think that this collaboration works is because of what I just said about. I think all three of us are interested in similar things, right? We want to tell the stories of the characters, what they're doing, why their choices matter, and how those choices ripple throughout the world. I mean, you say it all the time, Tom. Like this entire series, we kicked it off with one change. One dude, one German general takes a left instead of a right on his nightly walk, and everything else follows from that. And that's one of the things that I think is, really ties this story together, is that like we're really looking at it from not just the global, like top down, let's look at a battle map perspective. Although we do go there, but it always comes back to the individual perspective of how does this matter to the people on the ground, in the battle, in the building, in the ballroom, in the chambers of Congress. Take your pick, So, all right, we have been talking for almost an hour, so we should probably wrap it up here. But let's take a few minutes, and if you would tell my readers where they can find you if you're going to any in-person appearances. I know, Justin, you have one very soon. Tell them not only besides this book, which just came out the week before we are publishing this, or we're recording this, tell them what other recent things that you may have available for purchase or download or whatever. And yeah, if you have a website, tell them about that. And we'll start with Tom.
I do have a website, tomkratman.com. It's got some pictures, some actors, some opinion pieces. I've got two Substacks. One is really I'm just reissuing columns I wrote for an online magazine between 2015 and 2018. And the other is the care and feeding of your right-wing death squad, which isn't really what you think it is. It's really
a good title, though.
Warning for left. It is, yeah. It's a warning for left. This is what you're courting, and you might want to think about backing off because it's going to be ugly, and you're not good at this. Recent works, well, you mentioned it. Dirty Water is the other thing I've published in the last year or so. It is a Christmas story too, so it's a particularly good choice. I'm not sure how easy it would be to get a hardback copy anymore, and the paperbacks are not out yet.
Yeah.
There are Kindle copies, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not doing much traveling because I've got a spinal issue. Actually, I've got a bunch of spinal issues working together to make my life a misery that prevents me from driving long distances or flying in cramped aircraft.
Yeah.
Without having several days to lay on my belly and cry afterwards.
Sure. One note about Dirty Water, because you won't say it, so I will. Dirty Water was a Dragon Award finalist this past year in the category of alternate history, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it is a fantastic story and well worth checking out. And like you said, a Christmas story. So, Justin, how about you? Where can they find you online, in real life, recent works go?
So someone sat on justinwatson.com. So it's Justin Watson Books, all one word, justinwatsonbooks.com. I do have a website. You can find most of the stuff I've been in on there. 1919 Romanov Rising is only my second novel, collaborating with my friends above me on the screen. So Romanov Rescue, Romanov Rising are the only two novel-length works I have out. I'm in about 10 different anthologies, most recently Violent Blue Yonder, published by James L. Young.
It's another great title.
Yeah, Violent Blue Yonder, which posits I did an early jet combat story, because I'm not afraid to venture into realms where I have to read a lot, even though I've never been behind the stick of anything larger than a Cessna, and I don't have a pilot's license. So that's what's out recent. We're actually, interesting enough, in some of the Amazon charts, Violent Blue Yonder and Romanov Rising are sharing a row in the rankings.
Fun.
That's been
That's
fun
cool.
to watch. In person, I will be at Garden District Books in New Orleans on Tuesday, December 10th at 6 p.m. Sadly, Casey and Tom can't join me, but I'll be there to talk about our book. And maybe tease a little bit about where the series may or may not head in the future. So if you're in the New Orleans area, please stop by and come chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys know me. I'm Casey Zell. All my links and everything are in the description below. But you're here, so you probably already know all of that. So go check out 1919, The Romanov Rising. It's available right now wherever books are sold, in ebook and hardcover, with paperback to follow at some point in the future. And I want to thank Tom Kratman and Justin Watson both for writing this book with me, because it was super fun. And I really look forward to continuing this series with you, but also for joining me on the channel today. You guys, it has been a blast. Let me get rid of that. All right, there we go. All right. It has been a blast. Thank you so much to my co-authors, to you guys, my audience, for hanging out with us. I am Casey Zell, and this is my writer life. We'll see you guys. Give us a thumbs up if you like this type of discussion. Let me know in the comments. All right. Bye.
Merry Christmas, all.
Merry Christmas.